Hey y'all, so today we are going to do a dissection of a flower called an Alstroemeria. And I'm going to show you how to take it apart piece by piece, and we're also going to sort it into a couple of parts. The outer anatomy of the flower, the quote-unquote male anatomy of the flower, and the quote-unquote female anatomy of the flower. All right. So a couple of things. Yes, obviously flowers are not male and female the way that many people think of humans as being male or female. However, they do undergo sexual reproduction, meaning that they have two separate types of sex cells, two separate gametes that combine to form offspring. All right, and they do have systems that go with making those gametes, and we compare them to the human ones, and so we comparatively call them the male systems and the female systems, even if there are obviously a lot of differences between a flower and a human being, and that is okay. All right, so let's start with the outer parts here. This here is obviously just a bit of stem. You can pull it off if you would like. On this particular flower, you're not actually going to see this structure, but on many flowers you'll see a sepal, which is kind of like, it would be like a little green like leaf structure sort of going up immediately over the base of the flower. Alstroemerias actually don't have them. They do, however, have petals. So the very first thing you're going to need to do is to gently remove the petals of the flower. And I'm trying to work around my camera base here. So you can do this very easily by just gently pulling them off. All right, and you can take a look at the texture of the petals, the color, all those good things, and we are just going to sort them into the petal section. I'm trying to show my label here, the petal section of our diagram. Let me try and get this to set up nicely. All right, so you're going to pull apart all of your petals. You may notice that the outer petals look a little different than the inner petals. You might think about some reasons for why perhaps there are those differences. I like the inner ones personally because I have those fun stripes on them. All right. Now, everything that is left in here are the central plant reproductive organs. So from here, we can split into two basic categories, the male organs and the female organs. So we're gonna start with the male because they're kind of the easiest to separate off of the rest of the structure. So this is important. There are a bunch of little tubes here, right, attached to this base. The ones you want have this brownish yellow tip on the end. Some of them may look smaller than others. Those are immature. They have not aged as much. Some of them may look fully grown, but those are the ones you want to pull off. All right, so, and I apologize, I'm trying to use a tripod, but it's like a flexible tripod and it keeps slipping on me. Let me try and get this settled once and for all. All right. Okay, so here is one example of what we want to remove. All right, we call these the stamen, and we're gonna break them into their two pieces here in a second. But your plant probably has like 5 to 7, maybe 8 of these. I want you to be very careful. There is another tube that you do not want to pull off. So just be aware, you're going to be left with a tube that does not have one of these tips on the end, and a tube that is directly linked back to this base piece with some like green at the end that we will talk about in a little bit. So I'm gonna put this to the side. These are our stamen, our male pieces. This that is left over, I'm gonna let it come into focus here, maybe. Maybe, come on. So you can tell I'm not a videographer. Okay, we'll worry about it in a second. But this collectively, the female part is called the pistil. All right, now we're gonna kind of get in there with our tools. Unless you just have really long, delicate fingernails, in which case, great. But at this point, I recommend using your tweezers. Let's start with a nice large one so it's easier to see. All right, so the first thing you're going to do, gonna try and get this to where it'll focus. Maybe, maybe not. All right, so you've got this long tube and this piece at the end. I want you to literally just like pull that piece off. This piece is called an anther. Not answer, but anther, like if you were to say it with a lisp, all right? And inside of this is where all of the pollen in the plant is stored, or rather in every single one, right? So you've got 5 or 6 of them, all right? This right here, this is called the filament. The filament's only job really is to hold up the anther. It's basically just a support tube. So it doesn't really do anything all that fancy. It is just what the anther sits on. So I'm gonna separate these real quick. I'll leave one example to the end. But one thing to keep in mind, there we go, is we will leave one intact as an example of a stamen. So I will leave one full stamen intact. And then in a second, we'll open up an anther and see what's going on inside of those little pods. All right. Now, I just bought these this weekend. They usually sell them a little bit immature so that your flowers will bloom and last longer, which means we may not see everything we want to see inside of these. Now, inside of this, if we break it open, we very likely may see some pollen grains being developed. Or we might not. If it's really young and immature, you may not really notice anything unless you look at it up close. What you will see is there are distinct like pockets, openings of places where it could grow pollen, whether or not the pollen is there and fully mature yet. By the time y'all dissect, maybe some of y'all will have fully mature pollen. Okay, I'm now getting a little bit of pollen, a little bit of like yellowish dust on my fingers. You may or may not have known this before. Pollen is actually plant sperm. Really, it's a mixture of plant sperm and some other things that the plant needs to help the sperm to mature and to deliver it. But inside there is sperm, and it is therefore the male gamete of the plant. All right, so the male system is pretty straightforward. There's something to hold it up, and then there's a little pod that holds your pollen, holds your sperm. Great. The female organs are slightly more complicated, but not by a whole lot. There's 3 pieces instead of just 2. The first one is the very, very tip of this. You'll notice it's probably like lightly pink or red in color. That is called the stigma. And you'll know it's really mature when it's already starting to split open on its own. When it's fully mature and ready for pollination, it won't look like a tip that's closed. It'll look like kind of a branching prong like that. So if you see one that looks like that, you've got a really mature flower that's like ready for reproduction. I do not yet, but I'm gonna go ahead and tease the opening open using my tweezers so we can kind of see what it would look like. This is a little bit delicate. Give me a second. There we go. When you look closer at the tip, you'll notice there are actually openings. It's not solid. It's kind of pre-split into 3 little strings. All right. There we go. Let it refocus. And I've gone ahead and just gently teased them apart. All right. So there's 3 little openings that split open. That is the stigma. This is where the pollen granules, the sperm, actually land on the flower. So it's the opening to the female reproductive system. This tube here, I'm going to leave intact for the moment, but it is called the style. Okay, the style is a long tube that attaches directly to the main part of the female, quote-unquote, reproductive system, which is the ovary. You'll notice this is the same word we use for female humans, which is where human eggs are stored. It is where plant eggs are stored. So, there's an opening that sperm, aka pollen, can land on, travel down. Fun fact, sperm in plants, pollen will actually grow a tube that goes down this tube into the ovary, which I only learned recently. So the granules themselves won't actually travel, but the granules will land and grow a tube that travels down, and they'll reach the inside of the ovary, which, as you might expect, will contain eggs. And here's where we'll do a little bit of separation. So I'm going to take my knife, I'm going to remove the stigma and place it in our labeled stigma box. This is not my most precise instrument, as you can tell. I'm literally using a plastic knife from a fast food restaurant. I absolutely hate this tripod. Never using it again. All right. At this point, I'm just gonna pinch it off. All right. So that is going in my box for stigma. All right, and then the style. Oh, Lord. There we go. My style is this tube here. I'm just gonna kind of pluck out. It is directly attached to the base, so you'll have to kind of pull it at the base. And all that leaves is my ovary. We're gonna cut into it, and we should be able to see, at the very least, some immature eggs being formed. Again, the later in the reproductive cycle it is, the more likely it is you'll see some cool things going on inside the ovary. Okay, let's see. Yes, so you can see them if you look very close. I cut this in half. And of course, it's slippery and a little hard to grip. Let me stab it with my tweezers. Okay, so inside here, you can see the lighter green part. That's actually layers of immature ovum or seeds. And if I scrape at it, I can show you a couple of them. So if you can see, it almost looks like a teeny tiny grain of rice or a bean. There we go. That is an ovum taken directly from the ovary. And you can pull out more if you would like. So before there are seeds, there are ovum and pollen. And it's not until pollen fertilize the ovum that seeds can actually develop and be ready to grow into new plants. All right, so you can see like 5 or 6 ovum there, taken out of the left side of that ovary. I'm gonna leave the other half this undisturbed. So, in review, and of course I just pinched myself in this stupid tripod, which we're abandoning now. In review, as we dissected our flower, there's a few key parts. Number 1, let me get my good marker here. Okay. We have the outer parts. So we have our like flower petals, right? Often they're accompanied by sepals, which are small leaves that kind of cluster here at the base. In this case, an Alstroemeria doesn't have them, so we do not have any to dissect, but many plants do. Then when we look at the actual male and female anatomy, the male anatomy consists of a stamen. A stamen has 2 parts, the anther and the filament, so the tube, and then the anther actually produces the pollen, which has the sperm inside of it. And it probably has at least 3 or 4 or 5 of those, depending on the plant. I'll give it one more over here. All right. On the female side, at the base right here is actually the ovary. Try to get it to refocus. All right. And then coming usually straight up through the plant is a tube called the style. Style, spelled exactly like style of clothes, which I did not write clearly there. Style. All right, and then at the tip, when it's ready for pollination, it'll split into kind of a 3 or 4 pronged opening called a stigma. So, to make a new plant, you have to have pollen from an anther land on the stigma, grow a shoot down the style, reach the ovary, fertilize the eggs or ovum in the ovary, and then develop into new seeds. From there, you may wonder where the seeds go. Depends on the plant, but there's actually some very common everyday things that develop from the ovaries. You may want to make a guess as to what those are, and we will talk about that later on.